So I am a scientist C working in Indian Computer Emergency Response Team for the past almost 3.5 years. And I am working in the incident response team for CERT. So incident response team basically is like the firefighting team, as you can imagine. And whenever there is a cybersecurity incident anywhere in India, which is like of good importance, and it may have some bad consequences for India, then in that case, we are mobilized, and then we look at the incident and we take the remedial measures. So that is what we do. And in the process, we are able to collect a lot of case studies, and we are able to build a lot of knowledge when it comes to simple countermeasures related to cybersecurity. So in this lecture, I have put together some basics of cybersecurity. Some of the things you may already know, and we'll just brush upon them very quickly and move ahead. So let's just start with the presentation. So let's first talk about what cybersecurity is. And it's very basic definition. Cybersecurity or computer security is the protection of computer systems from theft or damage to their hardware, software, or electronic data. So very basic definition taken from Wikipedia, and I think everybody would already be knowing this. But we need to talk about why cybersecurity is important, and we need to basically know that what is the importance of having such sessions and having such discussions around cybersecurity as we are having today. So the main reason I think is that we are more and more reliant on computer systems nowadays than we used to ever be earlier. You can imagine that 10 years back or maybe 15 years back, the phone that you're carrying used to be a dumb phone. It was just a calling instrument with which you could send SMSs or you could just call. But nowadays, the phones have become smart, which means they have connected to the internet, and every mobile device that you carry is actually a computer system in itself, and it can do almost everything that your conventional desktop computer can actually do. So that's why we are more and more reliant on computer systems nowadays, and we have more and more of these systems around us which are connected to the internet. Then there are other devices which are also kind of getting connected to the internet. So you might have seen advertisements of Google Home and Alexa and other such assistants as well. So you can just call up the digital assistant, and it will be able to turn on the lights for you. It will be able to turn on your air conditioning for you. So it is able to control a lot of these devices which are also connected to the internet. TVs are connected to the internet nowadays. Even cars are getting connected to the internet. So this is what we call Internet of Things, or IoT, as you might have heard of this term. So as more and more of these things are getting connected to the internet, that we are getting basically we are creating more and more risk for ourselves as well. So if any of these devices is actually compromised, and comes under the control of an attacker, then it is possible then somewhere someone sitting on the other side of the globe may be able to turn on and off your lights. So this is a big problem, and we need to make sure that uh, we need to make sure about our own security and about the security of the systems that we have built around us also. And then I think the most important point is that money is nowadays online. So even if you're not using any digital modes of transactions, even if you're using the conventional mode of, taking the check to the bank and then withdrawing cash, even if you're using that basic method, but still the bank itself is having all its money online. So when you are doing some transaction inside your bank account, on some server, you're basically in some database, your account balance has been stored by the bank, and if you're withdrawing money from it, basically that value is being decremented. If you're adding money to your bank, if you're depositing some cash, that value is basically being incremented on some server. So everything around us is in some way or the other dependent on some computer system somewhere, and that's why we need to understand why it is important. why cybersecurity is important. So these are the three basic goals of cybersecurity. You might have already heard of this. They are called the CIA of cybersecurity. The first one is confidentiality, which means if you are sending across a communication to somebody, for example, if you're sending across an email to somebody, you want that only the recipient should be able to actually look at that email and nobody else should be able to read that email. So this is protecting the confidentiality. Then maintaining the integrity. So if you're sending an email saying that I want you to transfer 50,000 rupees into my account, so the mail should reach the recipient in the exact format that you had actually sent it out. So if somebody is able to actually intercept that email and he or she or the attacker is able to actually change that value from 50,000 to 5 lakh, then this is basically creating a problem on the integrity front. So basically someone is changing the values and the integrity is actually destroyed. So we want that all our communications, all our systems, and all our machines around us and everything around us, there should be an integrity, and we want to maintain this integrity. So that is the second goal of cybersecurity. Then the last point is availability. So we want that all our systems and all our email providers, all our net banking accounts and everything that we use, they should be available to us 24/7. So if someone creates an attack on your email provider and you're not able to access your email if you want to send out an urgent communication, then in this case, the availability of the system is hindered. So that's why we want to make sure that all our systems are available whenever they are designed to be. So these are the three goals of cybersecurity. And let's just talk about some current trends that have been going on in the cybersecurity domain. Some of some of these trends you might have already seen either in on TV or in the newspapers. So a large number of attacks have actually been large number of attacks have been happening on the banking infrastructure of late. So these are three examples. Two of them are from 2018, which were like two cooperative banks of India. One of them is City Union Bank and the other one is Cosmos Bank. And the other one is on Bangladesh's biggest bank, which is Bangladesh Central Bank. It happened in 2016. So I'll just briefly discuss about the attack on Cosmos Bank, which is actually a cooperative bank. And the method by which this attack was carried out was actually using ATM cards. So when you punch in your ATM card inside the ATM machine, it is possible that the attacker might actually have installed a skimmer device on the ATM machine. So when you punch in your ATM card, the skimmer device will actually read the magnetic strip and it will actually copy everything that is there on the magnetic strip. And after that is done, the attacker can actually create clone debit cards of your debit card, and then this clone debit card can actually be used to swipe in ATM machines for withdrawing cash. So that's what the attacker gang had actually done. They had cloned a lot of debit cards of this particular bank, and they were able to withdraw 78 crore rupees in different ATMs in 28 different countries almost at the same time. So that's what the first attack was, and they were able to withdraw a lot of cash by this. Then the next one was actually by attacking the Swift gateway. So a Swift gateway is actually a system or a machine inside the banking network which is used for validating transactions. So whenever you make a transaction with your Visa or MasterCard or any of the other credit or debit cards, then that transaction actually goes through this particular gateway and it is validated by the basically the trust party, and whether this transaction should actually go through or not. So the attackers were actually able to compromise this Swift gateway and whatever transaction they were throwing at it, that transaction was being validated. So this is how they were able to transfer around 14 crore rupees to a Hong Kong based bank. So this is another example of the current trends that have been going on. So Arogya Setu application was made mandatory by the government last year at the time of COVID, and after that we have been seeing fake Arogya Setu applications doing the rounds on WhatsApp messages or via SMS messages. And these Arogya Setu fake applications were mostly designed for spying on government officials and basically defense personnel. And the application would take a lot of permission from the user, and then it will start, turning on the microphone randomly or taking randomly pictures and reading the contacts and messages and call logs. So all these permissions it was taking, and we'll be talking more about these permissions and mobile security in the next lecture. I think it's day after tomorrow. So TikTok was one of the applications which was banned last year. I'm pretty sure you must have heard about this thing. It was all over the news. So TikTok has actually been flagged by a lot of countries for collecting a lot of data from the mobile devices of its users. So TikTok was actually collecting MAC addresses, and then these MAC addresses or all the data that TikTok was collecting was actually being sold to advertisers so that targeted advertisements could actually be served to its users. Then I'm pretty sure all of you must have heard about this term called defacement. So this happens most commonly with the government websites. Basically, an attacker is able to actually leverage on some vulnerability, and the attacker is able to use that vulnerability to actually compromise the website. And after compromising the website or getting access to the admin panel of the website, the attacker actually changes the homepage and puts up their own image on the homepage so that anybody who visits the website actually sees sees the homepage of the attacker. So that's how this is done, and this is not to gain any monetary benefit. This is mainly done to cause embarrassment for the department and for the government. So this is an example of a ransom email, and this is one of the attacks with the maximum amount of ROI in my opinion, because this does not require any investment and it can be executed very simply. But there are still people who are actually fooled into paying the ransom on this email. So what happens in this particular example is that you will get an email inside your inbox which will appear to be coming from your own account. So for example, if my email ID is yashdhingra@gmail.com, then this email will arrive inside my inbox from yashdhingra@gmail.com. So when I look at this email, it will appear as if I have sent this email to myself, or somebody has actually accessed my account and then sent this email to me. So that's what the email mentions. It says that I have access to your email account and I have been able to hack your computer system, and I have taken all your contacts. I have taken several of your video recordings from your camera while you were surfing the internet. And if you don't want me to share all these recordings and all these personal messages with your contacts, then you need to pay me so much amount in Bitcoins. So you can see in this, it is asking for 986 US dollars in terms of Bitcoins. So that is how this works. And the catch here is that the email is not actually coming from your own email account. It is being sent out from some random anonymous emailer website. So if you search for anonymous emailers, you'll come across several such websites which actually allow you to send such kind of emails, wherein you can specify both the from and the to field. So you can actually, this is actually used by a lot of people to prank people also. So you can prank your friends by sending out an anonymous email like that. And this is also used by attackers to actually get a lot of money. How you can actually find out whether this is fake email or this is a genuine email is by looking at the email headers. So what you see when you open an email is just the body, or you can actually compare it with the letter that is inside an envelope. So when you look at an email, you're looking at the letter. You are not able to look at the letter, sorry, you're not able to look at the envelope. So the email header is that envelope, and almost all email providers have this service of they'll give you the email headers. So you can right click on that particular email, and mostly you'll see an option called show original. So when you click on that, you'll be able to look at both the email header and the body as well. So when you look at the email header, it will give you the entire history of where all that email has traveled before landing up on your inbox. So what IP address was used for creating this particular email, and thereafter what all IP addresses or what all systems it has traveled to, and then ultimately come onto your machine or onto your email provider's IP address. So you'll be able to track the entire route, and you'll be able to figure out whether this email is fake or it is genuine. So this is the next example. It is called cryptojacking, and it is made up of two words called crypto and hijacking. So cryptocurrencies, I'm pretty sure most of you are aware of, and we've already talked briefly about Bitcoins. But there was this one particular cryptocurrency which was actually more simple to mine than Bitcoins, because Bitcoins actually require a large amount of computing power. So there was this cryptocurrency which did not require that much computing power, and it could actually be mined using uh, normal CPUs and normal laptop computers that we use nowadays. This particular attack was designed so that a lot of people could actually start mining cryptocurrency for the attacker. And how this was done is by compromising a website which was visited by a large number of users. And just by placing a small 3 or 4 line code inside the code of that website, I could actually start getting a lot of cryptocurrency. So whenever a user would go onto this particular website, their computer resources would start being utilized for mining cryptocurrency for the attacker. So the CPU usage will go up to 100%, and the fans will turn on, and your CPU will start getting hot, because it is actually mining cryptocurrency for the attacker whenever you visit such a website which has been compromised. So you can see that in this particular website, there was this small 4 line code which was added. And whenever you would visit this website, this cryptocurrency mining would start on your machine. Then ransomware, most of you would already be aware of. And ransomware is like basically kidnapping your data and asking you for ransom to get hold of it again. The data will stay on your machine, but it will be encrypted by the malware, and you will not be able to use it unless you pay certain amount of money in Bitcoins. So whenever we get such a case, we never advise people to pay the ransom, because you can never be sure whether the attacker will actually give you the decryptor tool even after paying the ransom. So we have through this discussion talked about a term called a vulnerability. And what is a vulnerability? Let's just look at that. So in very simple terms, or I think the most simple way to look at a vulnerability is like a hole in the fence. So if you don't want somebody from the other side to cross over to your side, you build a strong fence. But unintentionally, if you leave some hole inside the fence, then that becomes a vulnerability. And the attacker can actually use this vulnerability to cause some harm. So this is the definition. A vulnerability is a weakness which can be exploited by an attacker to perform unauthorized actions within a computer system. So very simple definition. And let's just talk briefly about the different kinds of vulnerabilities that can actually arise inside a computer system. So the first one is called technology weakness. So whenever whatever system you're using, whatever laptop or mobile device or any software that you're using is actually being coded by some human who is sitting somewhere. He could be anywhere, he or she could be anywhere on the globe. So when the developer of that particular software is actually creating the code for that particular software, then unintentionally there might be some weaknesses or some bugs which might be left behind inside the code, and these bugs or these weaknesses can actually be leveraged by the attacker to cause some kind of attack. So all these weaknesses or vulnerabilities which are left behind as bugs inside the code by the developer or by the manufacturer of the equipment, all these are called technology weaknesses. So the onus lies with the developer or with the company, whoever is providing the software, to fix these vulnerabilities. And that is what they do. So whenever a vulnerability is actually flagged to a particular company, or whenever some bug is actually identified which may lead to a security hole in the software, then the company actually releases patches or updates for these bugs and vulnerabilities, and these are then publicly also advertised on their website. So whenever these updates are released, notification is actually sent out to all the users, and the company tells all the users that you need to go ahead and install all these updates to make sure that your system remains safe. So you might have seen all these prompts that keep coming up from Windows or from Mac OS also, and even on Android, iOS, and it tells you that there is a new security patch which has been released and you need to install it. So all these are normally fixes for technology weaknesses which are sent out by the developer of the software. Then the next kind of vulnerability is actually called a configuration weakness. And configuration weakness, I'll just take an example of that. So when you buy a device from the market, for example, if you're buying a Wi-Fi router from the market and you're installing it on your premises, you'll see that most of these routers, they come with the default username and password credentials. So when you buy that initially, you need to punch in that default username and password so that you can get inside the admin console, and then you can make all the changes in the settings. So if you're leaving the same username and password unchanged, basically that can actually be leveraged by an attacker to cause harm, or can actually the attacker can actually gain access to your network also. So this kind of a weakness is called a configuration weakness. Now, the onus in this particular case lies both with the developer or the manufacturer and with the user. So normally, a manufacturer should not engage in this practice of keeping the same username and password credentials for all the devices that it is manufacturing. There should be some other methodology. And nowadays, some of the manufacturers of these wireless antennas and basically Wi-Fi devices, Wi-Fi routers, they are actually using different policies nowadays than using the same default user ID and passwords for all the equipment. So nowadays, what they're doing is either they'll use the MAC address of the device as the password, or they will have some random password generated for each of the devices, and that particular password will be punched inside the box, so that only so that even if the user is not taking initiative and changing the default passwords, even in that case, the device remains secure from attacks. So this is the second weakness. And then the third is called the security policy weakness. So when you enter inside your office premises, you might be asked for your ID cards. So this is a security policy which has been enforced by the organization. In a similar way, whenever you're trying to access your laptop, or whenever you are trying to access your email provider or net banking account, you are actually asked for your username and password credentials, and even OTP in some cases. So this particular all these looking for all these and checking all these authentications and checking all these authentication factors, as we call that, all this is called the security policy, which has been enforced by the organization or the company which is providing you the services. So if I am enforcing the password, but I am not enforcing not enforcing the use of strong passwords. For example, if I'm not telling the user that they need to have different types of letters and characters inside their passwords, then this becomes a security policy weakness. So the onus here is on the part of the organization, and all organizations are supposed to enforce the maximum possible security policies, so that or the best kind of security policies which can actually prevent different kinds of attacks. So these are the different kinds of vulnerabilities which can be exploited. And as I said, whenever an OEM or whenever the company which is the provider of the software gets to know that there is a vulnerability inside their code, they release patches and updates. And we track the updates and patches which are released by quite a few companies. And we actually publish vulnerability notes on our website. So you can visit our website, cert-in.org.in, and you'll be able to find out this section called vulnerability notes, where you will see vulnerability notes for a lot of manufacturers, including Microsoft, Apple, Google, Cisco, and Adobe, and all the major software vendors. So some basic countermeasures, what we are supposed to do in order to make sure that our systems are not vulnerable to attacks. First thing is that we need to keep all our applications updated. So on your mobile device, you keep getting notification that there are so many updates for different applications which are available. So it's best to actually install them as soon as possible in order to keep your mobile device or any other device safe. And we need to keep all our operating systems updated. Needless to say, you keep getting updates on your Mac OS or on your Windows machines, and on all the mobile devices as well, from the original operating system vendor. So you need to install all these updates as soon as possible, just to make sure that your system is not vulnerable to any attack. Then pirated software are actually a source of attacks as well. So someone who is creating the pirated software is basically bypassing the authentication mechanism which authenticates whether you have purchased that particular software or not. So if somebody is creating that bypass, the attacker actually might be able to embed some other malicious code inside the software. So if, although the software will work normally as it is designed to do, but it is possible that it may drop another malicious file or some other virus on your machine, which may be able to get control of your computer system. So pirated software is to be avoided completely. And then we should always maintain a good and updated antivirus on all our machines, because antivirus are actually able to prevent a few kinds of attacks. So this is just a brief information about how antiviruses works. And an antivirus basically works on the principle of file hashes. So a file hash is like a fingerprint of a particular file. So just like a fingerprint can actually be used for authenticating a user and for allowing access to a person. In a similar way, there you can create a fingerprint or a file hash of every file that you have on your system. So this hash could actually be 256 bits or 512 bits or 1024 bits, depending on the algorithm that you are using. But basically, it is a very small digest or a very small representation of the entire file. So it's possible that the file is of 1 terabyte or it could be of 1 megabytes, but the file hash would remain the same. Basically, the length of the file hash will remain the same. And all these file hashes are unique, and these file hashes can actually be used for identifying every file from each other. So whenever you try to run a file on your machine, whenever you're trying to open a document or you're trying to execute some exe file on your machine, the antivirus actually computes the file hash of this particular file, and this hash is actually compared with the database that it has of malicious files. So if there is a match found, the antivirus knows that the file that you're trying to open is actually malicious, and it will block the execution of that particular file immediately. So that is a very rudimentary explanation of how an antivirus works. Nowadays, antiviruses are really advanced, and they are uh, actually able to detect malware based on the behavior that the particular file is doing. So if a particular file is trying to access some registry entries, or if the file is trying to drop some files on your machine, in such cases, the antivirus, even though it will not identify the file hash, it may still be able to look at this behavior and may still block the execution of the file. And then it will give you a warning that this particular file is doing some actions which are normally associated with malware. So you might want to take a look, and you might want to see if you want to keep it or you want to delete this particular file. So this is how basically an antivirus works, and we need to keep the antivirus updated regularly. And there are a lot of free antiviruses also available. You can actually use these free antiviruses with basic features, or you can actually pay for some more advanced features if you want to enhance the protection. So that is the end of this particular section. I'll see if there are any questions in the chat window. So I don't see any questions as of yet. So I'll just move on to the next section. If the participants have any questions, you can keep pushing them inside the Q&A or the chat section, and we'll take them after this section, or maybe towards the end of the presentation. So this is the next topic called social engineering. So we have looked at a lot of vulnerabilities in the computer systems, but the most important or the biggest vulnerability actually in this entire chain, or this entire system, is actually the human. So computer systems work just the way that they're designed to do every time. So even if there is a bug inside the code, it will keep running the same way every time. But people can actually be manipulated into revealing a lot of information about themselves. So that is what these social engineering attacks are about. And social engineering is basically exploiting the human link in the security chain. And you are when someone is doing this social engineering attack, it is basically involves psychological manipulation of the person who is handling the computer system into revealing confidential information, so that the device can actually be compromised. Now we have seen that in even the most complicated or even the most advanced kind of attacks that we have seen over the years, it actually starts off with a very simple social engineering attack. So you might have heard of this thing called phishing. We are also going to discuss it in the next few slides. So even the most advanced attacks can actually start with a simple phishing email which is sent out to the victim. And once the phishing email is opened, once the person reveals their credentials on the phishing website, after that, their credentials are actually misused, and then the attacker are able to travel through the network. So they are able to compromise the entire network, and then that's how the largest attacks happen. They basically start with a simple phishing email. So it is important for us to look at this particular section even more important than the previous sections, because this is how most of the attacks are actually carried out. So phishing is basically creating a fraudulent lookalike website of a genuine website, and then using it to trick users into revealing their user ID and passwords or other credentials. So you'll get an email inside your mailbox which will say that your email is being blocked unless you change your password, or you'll get an email from your basically from your credit card company, and it will say that your card is being blocked unless you click on this particular link and you change your password, or you do something else, or you provide some other information. So when you go to that website, it will be a lookalike of the original website. And when you punch in the login ID and password, it will actually go to the attacker. And then the attacker will use your credentials to log into the genuine website and basically take control of your account. So that is how this happens. And we have seen a large amount of attacks happening on the income tax department. And you'll get these kind of emails. Some of you might have received such emails wherein it says that there is some amount of refund that you need to claim from the income tax department, and there will be a link which when you click, it will take you to a fraudulent website like this. This is an example of how this particular campaign used to work for the basically the fraud campaign of the income tax department. So you see the logo of the income tax department is there, and the website pretty much looks like the original income tax department's website. The only thing is that the domain, if you look at it, it is actually different from the original. So you'll see that it is UNIP and some random string.com. It is not the income tax department's website. So when you go onto this website, there is a drop down menu. You need to select your bank from the drop down menu. And when you select the bank, it will take you to the phishing page of your bank. And then you need to give your user ID and password, which basically you lose your lose access to your net banking account. And it will also ask you for your Aadhaar number, your PAN card number, your phone number, your address, and your credit card, debit card number, your ATM pin, all the details, all your financial details it will take from you. And then after that, the attacker will actually send out a fraudulent mobile application. So we'll talk about that in the next section, basically in the next presentation that we have on mobile security in detail. So once this particular mobile application lands up on your mobile device, it will start sending all your OTP messages to the attacker. And once the attacker has your username, password, and the OTP, they are able to make transactions from your account. So this is another example. This is a phishing page of RBI. You see the original is rbi.org.in, and the fake is e-rbi.gov.in. Then this is an example of phishing of Paytm. So it is asking for the OTP for logging into the Paytm account. And you'll come across several websites where you'll see the fraudulent applications are being are actually advertised. Basically, the bank's application are website, but these are all fraudulent pages. And these are the different kinds of phishing attacks or the different methodologies by which phishing attacks are actually carried out. So the first one is by taking control of some website and then pushing or creating a folder on the website which looks like the genuine domain name. So you'll see this is an example of notsosecure.com, which is a domain that the attacker has compromised. And then the attacker will place the bank name / login page or the subfolder inside it. So when this happens, basically a layman user or who is unaware of this particular attack, he or she will actually look at this domain name towards the end, the last part of the domain name, and believe that this is the genuine website. So that is how this first kind of attack is carried out. The second one is by using free hosting providers or subdomain providers. So there is this company called 000 Web Host, which actually provides subdomains of its domain on the, and this is free of cost. So you can actually create a website called statebankofindia.000webhost.com. So when you create this particular website, a layman user or someone who is unaware might actually look at the first part of the domain and might think that this is actually the genuine website. So this is the second, and then the third kind of attack is by creating similar looking domains. So you can see that there is an extra C inside the bank name. So for example, if I have statebankofindia.com, but I create that website and I add one letter I in between, which is very difficult to spot. So this is how it can be done. And then the next one is by using URL shortening services. So there are these several websites which actually give you the functionality of shortening the URL. So you can actually have a long URL, like you can see on the top, for example, bank.com.freespace sitename.com. you can actually abbreviate this entire long string or long domain into a very small little string like bit.ly/xyzabc. So you can go on to these URL shortening services, give it a long domain name, and it will create a short domain name for you so that you can easily send it across. So these are actually used for sending via SMS messages and via WhatsApp messages. So what happens is that you are not able to look at the domain name because this website bit.ly or this tinyurl.com whatever domain or whatever URL is there, when you click on this, it will redirect you to the actual domain. So that is how nowadays we see that a lot of phishing attacks actually leverage this functionality. And there are some other cases wherein you'll see that facebook.com, for example, they'll have the different kind of A which is there, or they'll change the I, or they'll have a 1 instead of the I, or because all these letters look the same. So these are the different kind of phishing attacks which can be carried out. And these are the basic countermeasures against phishing attacks. So always check the email source. Where you need to just look at the source of the email, just see where the email is coming from. So even if you look at the from field inside the email, we've already talked about this. It is possible that that from field may have been spoofed. So if you have a doubt over a particular email, you should actually look at the email headers to ascertain whether it is coming from a genuine source or not. And if you're receiving any links inside the email, you should ideally not click on those links blindly. You can actually right click on that link and you'll find a particular option in almost all browsers nowadays. So it's an option called copy link address. So when you copy this particular link address, you can actually paste that into the browser address bar, and then you can actually look at the website where this particular link was taking you. So this will allow you to actually look at the domain name before visiting the website, so that you can actually catch if it is a fake website or if it is the genuine domain name. Then you should always search for the genuine website if you are in doubt. So if you're receiving an email saying that you need to go to your net banking account and you need to change your password, or you need to do something like that, then make sure that even if you have a little doubt on the link which you have received, you can actually go on to Google and search for the genuine website and find out what the genuine website is. So that is another way. And I would always suggest that you should type the entire domain inside the browser instead of just copying and pasting it, or just clicking on the domain which you find randomly on the web. And you should avoid filling up forms. Like we've seen example that email actually supports this functionality of forms. So you might receive a form which will look like a Google form, and it will ask you for all different kinds of information. So you should always avoid filling up these forms if you receive them inside your email. Then the next example, or the next kind of attack, is called malicious attachment. So you will receive an email which will have a sense of urgency to it, and the attacker will actually ask you to click on a particular attachment which is there inside the email. And when you download that attachment and when you open it, it will actually compromise your machine. So this is an example of and this is an example of how a malicious attachment is actually sent across. So you'll see that the email says, please find attached an urgent message from Joint Secretary on the above mentioned subject. So it will have a sense of urgency. It will appear to be coming from some very important person higher up in the ladder. And it will have either a PDF file or an Excel file or a document file or exe file or even a zip file. So all these different file formats can actually be weaponized, and they can be used for taking malware to the victim's device. So when you receive such an email which appears to be urgent and there is an attachment, you should always avoid clicking on this particular attachment, because it is very high probability that the attachment is actually malicious. So we have of late we have seen a large amount of attacks on the government official on their official email IDs, and they are actually carried out using this same methodology. There will be uh, a mail which will have some sense of urgency, and the victims actually click on that particular link, and it installs a keylogger on their device, which starts logging all the keystrokes. So once the attacker gets all the keystrokes, they can actually identify the username and password. And after identifying the username password of the user, they actually log in to the victim's account. And after logging into the victim's account, they send this particular email to all the contacts of that particular victim. So they then actually target all the contacts also, and this same attack is executed. So next kind of attack is by honey trapping. So this actually is very commonly used on security personnel by the secret agencies of our hostile neighbors. So what they do is they'll send across a friend request to the security personnel on Facebook randomly, and the person will actually start talking to the victim. And after befriending them and after gaining their trust, they will send across a malicious link which is clicked by the person, and then the system is compromised, and all their communications and all their secret documents are actually taken by the attacker. So that is how this works. And I believe there are some questions before moving on to the last section. I'll just take some questions. So how quickly these okay, so there is one question. How quickly these websites are identified by government or original agency on fake website? So, sir, it is not actually possible to trace such websites because there are billions of websites on the internet, and you can actually create a website anywhere in the world. Uh, so it's not possible for the government or for anybody to actually keep looking for these websites and trace them. Although to some extent you might be able to find out these fake websites via some feeds. And as and when these websites are notified, the government actually takes action against them also. And the phishing pages are blocked, and sometimes the entire website is also taken down. So as and when these are actually brought to the notice of the government, action is actually taken. And what action government agency is taking on these fake websites? So as I said, these websites are actually taken down, and in most cases even law enforcement is involved by the affected party, and then law enforcement is actually able to find out the perpetrators or the creators of the fake websites, and they are actually caught by the police also. Okay, so any action on domain provider on which these fake websites are hosted? So actually depends, sir, if the domain web provider is actually sitting in some other country, or if it is a company which is incorporated outside India, then there is a little less chance that action can actually be taken against the domain provider, because the domain provider doesn't know whether someone is creating a website for phishing or whether someone is creating a genuine website in any case. What is the benefit of HTTPS tagged with any website? So this is coming in the last section. I'll talk about it. How we can avoid phishing by any software? So as we talked about the basic countermeasures, whenever you're receiving any link inside your WhatsApp messages or SMS messages or emails, don't blindly click on those links. Just make sure that you are looking at the domain. If it is a shortened URL like bit.ly or tiny URL or something like that, then just take that URL and open it on your laptop, so that at least you will be able to properly look at the domain where the browser is taking you. On a mobile device, it becomes a little difficult to read the domain properly or look at the website where you are being taken to. So I would advise, if you have any such links, don't open it on your mobile devices, open it on your desktop or laptops. How to check whether any third-party malicious script or software is running on the system? So, sir, as we talked about antiviruses in the previous few slides, if you have a good antivirus on your machine, just update it and scan your system. In most cases, it will actually be able to identify the malware. Also, it is possible that the antivirus may not be able to identify certain kinds of malware because it is not possible to keep the system 100% safe. But ideally, in most cases, you'll see that most of the malwares are identified by all the good antiviruses. So can we create our own virus? Because if want secure from ourselves, then we need to know how virus created. Definitely, sir. There are a lot of tutorials you can look at on YouTube and on other websites. They are available for free, and you can actually create your own virus also. It is possible that it may not also be detected by the antivirus, because when you create a virus for yourself, or if you're just trying to experiment, the antivirus does not have the signature or the hash of that particular file also. So it may not be detected, and you can actually try to do that. So I think that is the end of the questions for now, or I'll just check in the Q&A section once. How to handle when ransomware mail received? Okay, so ransom emails, sir, as I said, you need to look at the email headers and check if it is coming from the genuine source or not. So for example, if you're using Gmail and you're getting an email from your own email account, basically from Gmail, so when you look at the email headers, you'll see that the source IP address also would belong to Google, and the destination IP address would also belong to Google, which means that the email has not traveled on outside the network. It has traveled from a Google server to another server, or from this actually traveled between from one mailbox to another. So that is how you can actually find out by looking the trail inside the email headers. Otherwise, if you are still in doubt, you can actually email it to us. I will give you the search email address, and you can send it across to us if you come across any such fraudulent emails or phishing emails or any such fraudulent activity. Sir, please show some demo how we can check email source or root. Okay, so I don't have anything as of yet, but I think in the next session, if we have some time, I'll talk about it. We have it day after tomorrow. So I'll keep an example of a phishing email, or basically email headers, and I'll just spend 5 minutes and show you an example in the next session. Okay, so what action we need to take from user end? Sir, can you just elaborate the question? What action in what case you are talking about? I'll just move on to the next section, and then we will, this is the last section. So after that, we'll take up all the rest of the questions. So this is the last section is basically about personal cybersecurity hygiene, and what all basic countermeasures we need to take in order to ensure that our own devices are safe. So first thing that you can actually try to do is Google your own name. Just put your name inside double quotes and just search for your own name on Google or Bing or any other search provider. And this actually will give you a lot of information that you have unintentionally shared, and which is publicly available. So just by looking for your name, you might be able to find out some information. For example, your Aadhaar card or your phone number or your address might be available somewhere, and you might have unintentionally shared it. So try to do this, and also look inside the images tab. So if you use social media like Facebook or Instagram or any other social media, then it is possible that you might have shared some private images unintentionally, and you might not have taken care of the privacy, and all these images might be available publicly on the search engines. So just go through all the images, just go through all the information that you can find out on the search engine, and with this you might be able to identify some information which you can actually remove also. So on your social media accounts, you might be able to remove a lot of pictures which you think are not supposed to be online or are not supposed to be publicly visible. So next point is that you should actually go through all your social media profiles and check all the posts that you have shared in the past. Just see if you have shared any personal information or your any confidential information on your social media. So it is possible that you might have clicked some pictures in front of your work location or in front of your home, and unintentionally you might have revealed your address, basically your home address or your work address. So it is totally possible that some of your personally identifiable information, which we call as PII, so some of this information might actually be available publicly on the internet. So go through your friend list also. It is possible you might have unintentionally added some random people on your social media profile whom you don't want to keep. And you should always remove such random or unknown people from your social media accounts. Then you should go and recheck all the settings inside your Facebook account. And you need to make sure that all your posts and photos are only visible to your friends and they are not visible publicly. So in Facebook, actually, there is this option of modifying the privacy settings of all your past posts as well. So you can just go ahead and change the privacy settings to friends only. This means that anybody who is inside your friend list will be able to look at your posts and photos, but nobody else will be able to see all this information. Some other countermeasures, you should make sure that you're not revealing any information about you. Even your phone number is actually can actually be used for creating some kinds of attacks. So for example, your Paytm account is linked directly to your phone number, and your Bheem account, if you're using the Bheem application, you might have noticed that your phone number at the rate of UPI is your basically your UPI address. So all even your phone number, your home address, all these information should actually be confidential, and you should not ideally reveal to any random person unless you are sure of their identity and unless you are sure that they are a genuine person. Then avoid signing in on untrusted systems. Basically, try to sign in into your accounts only on your own machine. Even if you're signing in on an untrusted system, you can use the incognito or private mode inside the browser, so that when you close the window, your account is signed out automatically. And then you should disable autoplay for USB drives. And you should always scan USB drives with antiviruses. And then you should this last point is very important, using multiple online identities for different purposes. For example, if you have an email account, you can actually use the same email account to send out all kinds of communication. But ideally, it is advisable that you should keep your official and your personal email account separate. So whatever official communication that you're doing, it should only remain inside your official email account. Whatever personal communication you're having, it should only be through your personal email account. And actually, I would advise that you should keep a third email account for registering on different websites like food delivery applications, or for booking, basically like Book My Show or something like that, or for e-commerce websites like Amazon and Flipkart. So all this for registering on all these websites, you require an email ID, and you should keep a separate email ID for doing this. The reason why I am suggesting this is that it is possible that one of these websites might get compromised and their entire database could be leaked. So your email ID and password can actually be leaked, and it might land up in the hands of the attacker. So if you are using a separate email account and password, then in that case, your personal communication and your official communication is sort of saved. Uh, Ideally, if this account that you're using for registering on different websites, it should not be in your name, and ideally you should not keep any contacts or personal communication in that email account. So even if it is compromised, you still don't lose access to any of your personal data or on any of your confidential information. Then someone had asked this question about HTTPS. So when you go to a website, you might have noticed that there is a small lock icon which appears on the left side of the address bar. And in some cases, the lock icon will not appear, but the browser will say that this particular website is not secure. So that is the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. So HTTP means that when you are going to this website, and whatever information you are sending this to this particular website, for example, if you're trying to log in to an HTTP website, your username and password will actually be sent across unencrypted to the server. So from your machine, when you're punching in the user ID and password, it will be taken as it is to the server. So if there is someone who is sitting somewhere in the middle, they can actually create this man in the middle attack. In this particular case, they will be able to read your entire packets that you have sent to the server, and they will be able to read your login ID and password in plain text, and then they can actually use it for basically gaining control of your account. So if you are on the other side, if you are logging into a website which is HTTPS, it will show you a lock icon, and it will, if you click on that lock icon, the browser will tell you that the connection is secure, which means if you're sending across any information to this particular website which is secured by HTTPS, in this case your information is actually encrypted before it is sent across the network. So only the recipient will actually be able to read this information. Even if somebody is looking at all your packets and intercepting all your communication, they will not be able to read anything inside the packet because the information is encrypted. So that is the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. And this is an example of some random links which you might have noticed on Facebook or another other social media. There will be some sensational headline, and they will try to entice you into either clicking on some links or punching in your confidential information. So you should always stay away from these. And these are some other things that you can keep in mind. Uh, you should I think most of you would be knowing all these things, using unique and random passwords, and the password should contain uppercase, lowercase, and special characters also. And if you actually have difficulty in remembering all your different passwords, what you can do is, for all your non-essential accounts, like your all your accounts apart from your official and personal email, you can actually use a cloud password manager. So all these password managers require a master password, and when you punch in the master password, the actual password of the website is supplied to, and you don't need to remember all your different passwords. So you can use any of these password managers also. And passwords should ideally be changed once or twice a year. And if two-factor authentication is possible, or if it is available from the service provider or from the vendor, then you should always enable this. So you might not be aware, but I think most of the email clients nowadays, Gmail and I think even Outlook, they offer this option of two-factor authentication, wherein you will need to punch in the user ID and password, and thereafter they will send you an OTP on either on your mobile device or in some other format. And you can actually punch in that OTP, and only then you will be able to sign in into your account. So that is the end of the presentation. I will just go through the chat section again to see if there are any questions. Okay, so I think there is just one or two questions. We can use different email on commercial website, but what about our phone number, sir? So for same thing for phone number, you can also implement, sir, for the phone number that you have provided to the bank. You should keep a separate phone number that you provide to the bank, and for sharing with people, you can keep a separate phone number. So you can also maintain two phone numbers just like that. Okay, so I think that is the last question. Just
Sir, there are some questions in the question and answer section.
yes, sir. I'm just checking that. whether our email is safe, because I'm getting so many malicious emails. There is this question someone has asked. So, sir, if you're getting a lot of malicious emails, basically this happens when you register on a lot of websites using this particular email. This email account is actually propagated across the network, and your email details are actually shared between different websites. So all this data is basically shared, and it is actually sold on the web. So it is possible that if you register with your email on different websites, you'll start getting these random malicious emails, but that doesn't mean that your email has actually been compromised. It just means that you are using this particular email for registering on a lot of websites. So that's why I was saying that uh, you should actually use different email accounts for different purposes. So that is one question. And how to handle standalone PC? I don't understand this question, sir. If you can elaborate.
Yes, this is Anupam here. Actually,
Yes, sir.
we have already overshot the time. Next speaker is waiting. So
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
it
We have
would be
already.
better.
I'm done with the questions also, so we can.
If there are more questions to the participants, please, if there are more questions, you can just forward the question to the Yash Dhingra or to the panelists. Yash will write down your answer and give a reply to you.
Sure, sir. I'm just pushing. I'm just entering our email ID, CERT's email ID in the chat
Sure,
box,
sure.
and
Yeah.
you can actually, if you have any issues or if you come across any malicious or fraudulent activity, you can actually send it out to us. So thank you to all the participants, and thank you to the organizers also.